thought my wife cheated on me. Then she said the father was my own brother. My family was never the same again. My younger brother Dennis always believed I would simply forgive him for sleeping with my wife because he had spent his entire life being mom and dad's favorite. He couldn't have been more wrong. Now he's paying the price for what he did, and so are the people who enabled him for years. In the end, his betrayal turned out to be the breaking point for everyone involved. Our parents finally cut him off completely, refused to keep financing his lifestyle, and even named me the only heir to their $1.5 million estate. These days, he's suddenly calling, saying he's sorry for everything, and asking if we can leave the past behind and start over. I have a younger brother named Dennis, and for as long as I can remember, he has absolutely hated me. If you're thinking it was because he was jealous of me, that's not the case at all. He had no reason to be jealous because he was always the favorite child, not me. To understand how everything got to this point, I need to explain what growing up in our family was like. My mom spoiled Denise from the moment he was little. He was the unquestioned golden child in our house. She cooked every meal for him, washed his clothes, and even expected me to help him with his homework whenever he needed it. I was constantly reminded that I should help him simply because we were family, yet nobody ever expected him to do the same for me. Eventually, I stopped fighting it because I had learned to take care of myself. Looking back, maybe I made things worse by always giving in and helping him whenever he wanted something. No matter how much I did for him, he never returned the favor. The only time he ever reached out to me was when he needed something for himself. I was a quiet, introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, while Denise was the complete opposite. He was loud, rough, and almost identical to our dad in both personality and behavior. I've always been the kind of person who speaks honestly without sugarcoating the truth, and I think my mom eventually decided she didn't like that part of me. Because of that, Dennis naturally became everyone's favorite in the family. When we were younger, I didn't really care about the favoritism itself. What bothered me was that he constantly used it as an excuse to bully me and make fun of me for being different. He mocked my height, laughed at the fact that I wore glasses and would sneak into my room just to read my diary. Then he'd run straight to our mom and complain about anything personal he found inside. Whenever I confronted him or told my parents he was invading my privacy, they would simply laugh and tell me I was making a big deal out of nothing. His behavior went far beyond teasing. He almost broke my glasses more than once and regularly tampered with my food. One time he even hid small stones inside my bowl of cereal. Thankfully, I spotted them before I bit down and damaged my teeth. When I told my mom what had happened, she casually dismissed it by saying, "That's just how brothers bond." Every argument between us followed the same pattern. Dennis knew exactly which of my insecurities would hurt the most, and he never hesitated to use them against me. Since we attended the same school, he knew I was already being bullied by a couple of kids. Instead of standing up for me, he sided with them. He joined in while they called me names like ugly loser and hairy monkey, and he even encouraged them to push me around because, in his opinion, I was nothing but a complete failure. There was another argument we had years ago. Honestly, I can't even remember what started it because it was probably over something completely insignificant. But I'll never forget how it ended. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me I should kill myself. I could ignore most of the insults he threw at me, but those words cut deeper than anything else because I was already struggling with my mental health at the time. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now, but hearing my own brother say he wanted me dead was devastating. My dad was almost always working, and my mom barely cared enough to step in. One time, she even blamed me for provoking him, insisting the whole thing was my fault because I had annoyed him while we were playing. As the years went on, everything only became worse. Things eventually escalated even further. During high school, Dennis actually tried to set my hair on fire. As unbelievable as it sounds, my mom immediately defended him, insisting he was only joking around. I remember thinking, who in the world considers something like that a joke? Thankfully, my dad finally stepped in. For the first time, he took my side and admitted that something was seriously wrong with Dennis's behavior. He even warned him that if anything like that ever happened again, he would call the police. Dennis looked completely stunned because he had spent his entire life getting away with everything. Being held accountable was something he had never experienced before. My dad made it clear that enough was enough and that it was time for him to start treating his older brother with respect. Later that day, my dad came into my room to talk with me privately. Honestly, I never expected that conversation because he had always told Dennis how alike the two of them were while he was growing up. And in many ways, that was true. He admitted that for years he had convinced himself Dennis was just an immature kid who would eventually grow out of his behavior. Now he realized that what he had been watching wasn't childish behavior anymore. Dennis had become a bully. Hearing those words from my dad made me feel more understood than I had in years. I came close to breaking down because someone had finally acknowledged what I had been living through. I ended up telling him everything Dennis had done to me over the years, along with everything I had been dealing with at school because of the bullies. My dad was genuinely shocked that I had been carrying all of that by myself. The very next day, he met with my school's principal and made sure the students bullying me were warned that there would be serious consequences if they continued. That same evening, he signed me up for mixed martial arts classes at a local gym and told me it was time to toughen up and learn how to stand up for myself. I'll be honest, watching a quiet, nerdy kid like me trying to learn how to fight probably looked pretty ridiculous in the beginning. But if there's one thing about me, it's that once I decide to master something, I put everything I have into it. I organized my schedule so I could keep up with my studies while still training every single day and attending every mixed martial arts class. I'm not trying to brag, but that decision completely transformed both my confidence and my physical appearance. Before long, Dennis was causing problems again. This time, he stole the pocket money I'd earned by helping our parents with chores. I had been saving that money for a long time because I actually had plans for it. While I wasn't home, he sneaked into my room and took every dollar. I caught him just as he was about to ride away on his bike with his friends. I calmly demanded that he give my money back because he knew perfectly well that stealing was wrong. Instead of feeling guilty, he laughed in my face and mocked me, saying the only thing I knew how to do was run to Dad for help. Something inside me finally snapped. Without even thinking, I punched him square in the face as hard as I could. He crashed backward onto the ground, completely speechless from the shock. I pulled him back to his feet, reached into his pocket, took my money back, and then shoved him right back onto the ground. Dennis immediately burst into tears, crying like a little kid. Honestly, seeing a teenage boy lying there sobbing was almost ridiculous. A few seconds later, my mom rushed outside after hearing her precious son crying. She helped him up and demanded to know what had happened. The moment she found out I had hit him, she looked shocked before immediately turning her anger toward me. Instead of asking why I had done it, she lectured me about how, as the older brother, I should be setting a better example for Dennis. Meanwhile, he stood there enjoying every second of me getting blamed. My mom complained to my dad, insisting that I had attacked Dennis and needed to be disciplined. My dad listened quietly before asking both of us to explain exactly what had happened. I told him Dennis had stolen the money I'd worked hard to earn and had been saving for months. Dennis tried to justify himself by claiming he needed the money to take a girl on a date, and that, as his brother, I should have been willing to help him. My dad wasn't buying any of it. He told Dennis that he was lucky all he got was a punch because most people would have called the police after being robbed. Then he reminded him that he had absolutely no right to take someone else's property without permission. Dennis hated hearing that. He immediately threw a tantrum, obviously hoping Mom would rescue him like she always had. This time, though, Dad refused to back down. Once Dennis realized I wasn't going to be punished for hitting him, he screamed that he hated me before storming to his room and slamming the door behind him. After that day, he mostly kept his distance from me. For the first time in years, he understood that I wasn't someone he could push around anymore, and even Dad had stopped defending his behavior. For the first time in my life, it finally felt like we were standing on equal ground. Even though he no longer dared to pick physical fights with me, he still looked for opportunities to insult me whenever our parents weren't around to hear it. As Dennis got older, his attitude only became worse. Every year, it seemed like he grew more bitter, more hostile, and far quicker to lose his temper. Whenever I tried to ask him even the simplest question, he would pretend I didn't exist. He'd look right through me, walk out of the room without answering, and quietly mutter insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he ever needed something from me, he refused to speak to me directly. Instead, he would tell our mom, and she would pass the message along like some kind of messenger. I asked her more than once why he couldn't simply come to me himself if he wanted something. Every time, she would just tell me to be patient and try to understand him. Honestly, I never knew whether I was supposed to wait for him to grow out of it or accept that he genuinely hated me. For years, I managed to ignore most of his insults, but eventually I reached my limit. I wanted nothing more than to move out and put as much distance between us as possible. I went to my mom over and over again, asking her to help us sit down together so we could finally talk through whatever was causing all this resentment. She refused every single time, saying she didn't want to get involved. I even asked if she had any idea why Dennis treated me the way he did, but she always dismissed the question without giving me a real answer. Eventually, I was accepted into my dream university. Thanks to my straight A grades, I even earned a scholarship, which made the opportunity even more rewarding. My dad was proud enough to throw a celebration before I left, and my mom also seemed genuinely happy about my achievement. Dennis, on the other hand, barely acknowledged any of it. He stayed distant and acted like none of my accomplishments mattered. When the day finally came to leave for college, I felt two completely different emotions at once. I was excited to begin the next chapter of my life, but I was also incredibly relieved to escape the toxic environment I'd grown up in. Those first few months at university felt like I could finally breathe. I made good friends, enjoyed my classes, and slowly built a life that had nothing to do with the constant tension back home. Without Denise around, I no longer had to worry about hearing another insult every day. For the first time in years, I experienced a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I had been missing. I met my wife, Olena, during our second year at the university. One of my friends introduced us at a party, and we connected almost immediately. Both of us came from religious families where having children before marriage was considered unacceptable. During our final year of college, we found out she was pregnant. So after graduation, we got married as quickly as we could. Our wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was warm, peaceful, and filled with people who cared about us. Both of our families celebrated with us, and the day remains one of the happiest memories I had at the time. Back then, I truly believed I'd found the love of my life. I had always wanted a simple life built around one lifelong partner. I never cared about casual relationships or chasing other women. Even when opportunities presented themselves over the years, I never acted on them because I was completely devoted to my marriage. To me, Olena was everything I'd ever wanted, and the last thing I ever wanted was to hurt her. Unfortunately, our marriage wasn't nearly as perfect as I believed it was. Over the years, I discovered that Olena had been unfaithful to me on two separate occasions. The first was an affair with a married coworker that started and stopped over the course of several years. The second happened when she visited her family in another state and ended up having a brief relationship with an ex-boyfriend she had dated back in high school. I know there are probably people who would say I was a fool for staying after that, and honestly, looking back now, I can't completely disagree with them. Both times we separated for a while before I eventually chose to forgive her. I desperately wanted my child to grow up with both parents under the same roof, and I honestly believed we could repair what had been broken. When the affair with her coworker happened, we were still fairly young, so I convinced myself it was the result of immaturity and poor decisions rather than a lack of love. For a while afterward, things really did seem to improve. I never fully regained my trust in her, but I made a conscious effort to set my doubts aside because I believed that forgiveness only meant something if I genuinely tried to move forward instead of constantly holding the past against her. By the time 3 years had passed since her second affair, I truly believed I had made the right choice by giving her another chance. I thought she had proven she wanted to stay committed to our marriage and build a future together. For years, it honestly seemed like Olena had changed. Our marriage felt stable again. We were happy together, and we had already started making plans for the future of our family. I truly believed we had survived the worst and were finally moving forward. Then, 4 months ago, everything fell apart all over again. This time, what she told me was even more devastating than anything that had happened before. She confessed that she had been involved with someone else for quite a while and then quietly told me that our son might not even be biologically mine. The moment those words left her mouth, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. I was overwhelmed by shock, betrayal, and complete disbelief. I couldn't even process what I had just heard. Over the next several days, I kept asking her why she had hidden something so life-changing from me and how she could have betrayed me in such a cruel way. Instead of showing remorse, she acted distant and emotionally cold. It was as if my pain barely affected her. Every answer she gave was vague and incomplete, leaving me with even more unanswered questions. I found myself standing in the middle of a life that no longer felt real, trying to make sense of a family I suddenly wasn't even sure belonged to me. I kept pressing her for the truth because I believed I deserved to know who my son's biological father might be. After all, I had been there for him from the very beginning, raising him, loving him, and believing he was my child. Eventually, after enough questions, she finally admitted the truth. She said the other man was Denise. I just stared at her in complete disbelief. My eyes went wide as I asked her what she meant because I couldn't accept what I had just heard. That's when Olena explained how everything had started years earlier. Back when I first introduced her to my family, she stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. I remembered that visit clearly because Denise, who had always been cold and dismissive toward me, was surprisingly friendly and welcoming to her. At the time, I was actually relieved because I wanted her to feel accepted by my family. She genuinely wanted to become close with everyone, especially my mom, so she spent a lot of time with her whenever she had the chance. Eventually, she noticed how distant Denise and I were from each other and asked me what had happened between us. That was when I finally opened up to her about everything from our childhood. I explained how badly he had treated me for years and admitted that I doubted we would ever have a normal relationship because he had never been able to let go of whatever resentment he felt toward me. She listened and seemed to understand. At the same time, she started making an effort to include Dennis whenever we spent time together, hoping the two of us might slowly repair our relationship. If we planned to go see a movie, she would invite him along, and somehow we usually ended up watching whatever movie Denise wanted instead. Looking back now, I realize that was probably the first time Denise and I had spoken more than a few words to each other in years. Compared to the complete silence that had existed between us before, it almost felt like progress. I also remembered seeing Elena and Dennis playing video games together from time to time, but I never thought there was anything inappropriate about it. According to her, one day, Dennis opened up about how much he was struggling after his girlfriend had broken up with him. She said he seemed vulnerable and emotionally broken, and the two of them gradually became close friends. Eventually, he started flirting with her whenever I wasn't around. She claimed it seemed harmless at first, but little by little their relationship crossed the line until, as she put it, she could no longer stop herself. I shut my eyes because the image of my own wife sleeping with my own brother made me feel physically sick. She told me that afterwards she was overwhelmed with guilt and immediately pulled away from him. Then she decided to leave and go back home earlier than planned. I remembered that happening because at the time, my girlfriend had unexpectedly told me she wanted to leave instead of staying with me through New Year's. I had tried to convince her to stay longer, but she insisted she had to go, and I never questioned her decision. After the holidays, when we returned to college and classes started again, she acted exactly like her normal cheerful self. Because of that, I never suspected that anything had happened. Then, only 2 weeks later, we learned she was pregnant. Now she admitted that she never knew whether the baby was actually mine or Dennis's because she had no way of proving it. She told me that since I'd already stepped up and was clearly the more dependable of the two brothers, she chose to stay with me instead. According to her, that was the real reason we got married. Hearing all of that made it feel like my entire world was collapsing around me. The little boy I'd loved unconditionally and devoted so much of my life to might not even be my biological son. I asked Elena one more question. I wanted to know if her relationship with Dennis had continued in recent years, or if it had only happened back then. After a long pause, she slowly nodded. She admitted that she and Dennis had never really stopped seeing each other because, in her words, the chemistry between them had always been impossible to ignore. Whenever she told me she had to work late, she was often meeting him at hotels instead. She even confessed that about half of her so-called business trips had actually been romantic vacations with my own brother. I asked her the question I couldn't stop thinking about. If she truly wanted to be with Dennis, why had she stayed married to me all these years? She answered that she never wanted to be the one responsible for ending our marriage. She also said that watching me be such a good father to our son made it easier to stay. According to her, everything had started as a mistake, and before she realized it, she no longer knew how to stop. After hearing all of that, I simply told her I was grateful that she had finally told me the truth and that I was leaving. I walked toward the bedroom, opened the closet, and began packing a suitcase. That calm reaction seemed to catch her completely off guard. She burst into tears and begged me to forgive her. She even said she had expected me to scream, yell, or completely lose control, but instead, I was quietly planning my next step. I didn't answer. I just kept folding my clothes and placing them into my suitcase. She followed me around the room, insisting that if I truly loved her, I would at least fight for our marriage. She kept repeating that every marriage goes through mistakes and that people deserve second chances. When she realized those words weren't changing my mind, she switched to another argument. She said our son would suffer if we divorced and that children deserve to grow up with both parents together. I quietly reminded her that I might not even be his biological father. Hearing that reduced her to tears all over again. Then she started accusing me of being heartless, saying it was cruel that I could walk away after raising him from the day he was born. It honestly felt like Olena believed there was no betrayal serious enough to make me leave. Looking back, I can understand why she thought that. I had forgiven so much in the past that she probably assumed I would forgive this too. I still cared about her in some ways, but I realized much of that love came from believing we had built a family together and from all the years we had shared since college. She kept insisting it wasn't too late, that we could still fix everything and save our marriage. The problem was that I simply couldn't believe anything she said anymore. Trust had been destroyed long before that conversation, and now it was completely gone. Even if I somehow managed to forgive her, I knew I would never be able to erase the fact that she had been sleeping with my own brother. I've always believed people deserve forgiveness because everyone makes mistakes, but there are some lines that, once crossed, can never truly be repaired. For me, this was one of those lines. I left her standing in the doorway, crying, while I drove to a hotel and checked in for the night. The following morning, I went straight to my parents' house and told them everything. I explained that Olena and Dennis had been having an affair for years and had secretly been sleeping together behind my back. Both of them looked completely stunned. My mom, however, reacted exactly the way I expected. Almost immediately, she started defending Dennis. She insisted there had to be some mistake because, according to her, her son would never betray his own brother like that. I knew words alone weren't going to convince her, so I asked both of my parents to stay completely silent while I called Dennis right there in front of them. I explained that they couldn't make a sound because I wanted him to think he was only talking to me. If he believed it was a private conversation, I hoped he would let his guard down and tell the truth himself. When Dennis answered the phone, I confronted him directly about his affair with Olena. At first, he denied everything without hesitation. He insisted I was making it all up and refused to admit a single thing. But the moment I told him that Olena had already confessed everything, his attitude changed. Instead of denying it anymore, he immediately started blaming her. He called her characterless and acted as though none of it was his responsibility. Then he actually told me it wasn't his fault if women found him attractive because he was the better-looking brother. I told him that I was going to expose everything and make sure everyone knew exactly what he had done. He laughed and arrogantly claimed that nobody would ever believe me because he was still the golden child. I couldn't help but laugh at how overconfident he was. Then I thanked him for confirming the truth because our parents had been listening to every word of the conversation. The line suddenly went silent. A moment later, Dennis started stumbling over his words, desperately trying to explain himself and undo the damage. But by then, it was already far too late. My mom was still trying to process everything she had just heard. She immediately demanded that Dennis explain himself. Instead of taking responsibility, he stumbled through one weak excuse after another, blaming everyone except himself and desperately trying to put all the responsibility on Olena. As I watched my mom listen to him, I could see the change in her face. The woman who had spent years protecting her favorite son now looked deeply disappointed and genuinely angry. Standing there, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Well, it wasn't happiness, but it was a sense of justice. For years, I had been the one who suffered while Dennis got away with everything. Now, the truth was finally out in the open. For once, everyone could see exactly who he really was. The person being judged and exposed wasn't me anymore. It was him. As Dennis continued to stumble over his words, my dad, who usually kept his emotions under control, finally reached his breaking point. He asked me to hand him the phone, and the moment I did, he let Dennis have it. "Dennis," he said, his voice filled with disappointment, "what you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother. You've betrayed this entire family. You slept with your own brother's wife, and you kept doing it even after they were married. Your choices have consequences, and you've destroyed the trust we had in you. I raised both of my sons to understand loyalty, honesty, and respect for family. What you've done goes against every value I ever tried to teach you." He paused for a moment before continuing. "You showed absolutely no respect for your brother, his marriage, or the family that stood behind you all these years. You've hurt him in ways I can't even describe, and you've damaged this family beyond repair. Your mother and I have to accept that we played a part in the person you've become by making excuses for you for far too long. That's over now. Starting today, I'm cutting you off completely. The college fund I set aside for you is gone. You'll figure out how to pay for your education yourself. I'm also done paying for your lifestyle. If sleeping with married women makes you feel like a real man, then let's see how confident you are when you're living without my financial support." Throughout the entire conversation, I stayed calm. Part of me had wanted to scream at Dennis and tell him exactly what I thought of him, but watching my dad finally hold him accountable gave me more satisfaction than yelling ever could have. After years of escaping every consequence, Dennis had finally run out of chances. He kept trying to defend himself and make excuses, but my dad had heard enough. Without another word, he ended the call, cutting off Dennis before he could continue trying to justify what he had done. After everything went quiet, my mom walked over to me and wrapped me in a hug. We hadn't shared a moment like that in years. Neither of us said much, but I could feel her regret and support in that embrace. She apologized for never believing me all those years whenever I tried to tell her what Denise was really like. In that moment, I couldn't help thinking about my 12-year-old self. If someone had told that lonely kid one day his mother would finally believe him and hold him close, he never would have believed it. Afterward, my dad helped me find an excellent divorce lawyer so I could finally end my marriage with Elena. She and her attorney tried to make the divorce as difficult as possible by asking the court to award her alimony because my income was higher than hers. Fortunately, her years of infidelity worked heavily against her during the proceedings. As part of everything, we also completed a paternity test to determine whether my son was biologically mine. The results confirmed my worst fear. Dennis was his father. I can't even describe the pain of hearing those words. Somehow it hurt even more than discovering that my wife had been cheating on me. Realizing the little boy I had loved and raised wasn't biologically mine shattered something inside me. I was overwhelmed with anger and heartbreak, but despite everything, I forced myself to stay strong and keep moving forward. Elena begged me not to disappear from my son's life. She pleaded with me, saying he had done nothing wrong and shouldn't have to suffer because of the choices she and Dennis had made. As heartbreaking as it was, I couldn't bring myself to see him. Every time I looked at him, I couldn't stop seeing Dennis. And that was a pain I simply wasn't able to face. After the divorce was finalized and I was officially free, I moved into my own apartment. It felt strange at first because I had married so young that I had never really experienced living by myself. Thankfully, independence had always come naturally to me, so it didn't take long to settle into my new routine. Before long, I realized I genuinely enjoyed the freedom and peace that came with living alone. About 3 weeks ago, my dad called and told me he had decided to update his will. He explained that he no longer wanted Denise to inherit anything. One thing you should know about my dad is that once he makes up his mind, there is almost nothing that can change it. After deciding he wanted nothing more to do with Denise, he stuck to that decision completely. Dennis had tried reaching out to both of my parents several times. He even showed up at their house begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him inside. What surprised me the most was that even my mom, who had spent years giving in to him, finally refused to rescue him. I know that decision must have hurt her more than anyone else. The most telling part was that through all of this, Dennis never once contacted me to apologize for what he had done. The only thing he seemed upset about was losing access to our parents and the comfortable life they had provided for him. My dad then explained exactly how he planned to divide his estate. To make sure Dennis couldn't successfully challenge the will later, he intended to leave him only $5. Everything else would go to me. Considering all the years my dad had worked, along with his investments, retirement savings, insurance, and other assets, the estate was worth nearly $1.5 million. The only condition was that if he passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house for the rest of her life, even though ownership of the property would legally transfer to me. I had absolutely no problem with that because I wanted to make sure my mom was cared for no matter what happened. Somehow, Dennis found out about the changes to the will. Since my parents refused to answer his calls, he decided to contact me instead. Yesterday, he called, pretending he wanted to repair our relationship. He told me he was struggling to keep up with college after losing Dad's financial support. He also said that once Elena learned the paternity test had confirmed he was Nazar's father, she began demanding child support from him. According to him, he was completely broke. He said he had been applying for part-time jobs but couldn't find anything. Then he begged me to talk to our parents so everyone could reconcile because, as he put it, he desperately needed my help. I couldn't help laughing after everything he said. I told him I was completely finished with him and reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. He argued that I was treating him unfairly because Olena was just as guilty. I agreed that she absolutely shared the blame. Then I reminded him that I had already divorced her and that she was now his responsibility, not mine. If he was unhappy about supporting her or their child, he had nobody to blame except himself because those were the consequences of the choices he made. Dennis started raising his voice, but I cut him off before he could continue. I reminded him that he was no longer the family's golden child. Now he was the black sheep who had betrayed his own brother in the worst possible way. That was the moment he finally broke down. He started crying and told me that everyone had turned against him, including our grandparents and other relatives. I already knew that was true, but I no longer considered his problems my responsibility. I told him our relationship was over, that he should never contact me again, and that I no longer considered him my brother. Ever since that phone call, I've replayed the conversation in my head more times than I can count. Despite everything he's done, hearing Dennis cry affected me in a way I didn't expect. I honestly can't remember the last time I heard him cry after we became adults. Part of me felt sorry seeing him so completely broken. That's why I'm here asking whether I should speak to my parents on his behalf or whether I would be wrong for staying out of it.